It's hard to go wrong if one writes at length about the Old West, still the phantom leg of the American psyche. I thought I had written about a harsh time and some pretty harsh people, but to the public at large I produced something nearer to an idealization. Instead of a poor man's inferno filled with violence, faithlessness, and betrayal, I had actually delivered a kind of Gone with the Wind of the West, a turnabout I'll be mulling over for a long, long time. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books, and today I want to talk about Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. Published in 1985 and winner of the Pulitzer Prize in 1986, it follows the adventures of two retired Texas Rangers as they decide to drive cattle from Texas to Montana. That is true. However, it's also really not at all what the book is about. That's sort of the structure that the story sort of finds itself within. But it's really, even though this is a Western, and if you were to say, look up what are the best Westerns out there, best Western novels, even best Western movies, Lonesome Dove is going to be on that list somewhere, even though I think the movie adaptation is like a made-for-TV movie, maybe. It's really a fantastic novel, and it is a Western, but it really is more like a really good novel that happens to be in the West. It feels more like that. It doesn't, it hits all the notes that you would expect for a Western, but it isn't pulpy. It isn't something like you would read from like Louis L'Amour or Zane Grey. It's not that kind of Western, even though sometimes it does very similar things. Where those novels seem to focus a lot on the action and the adventure, Lonesome Dove takes a long, careful look at its characters. And that might, to someone who is maybe interested in reading a Western, seem uninteresting. And it might, to someone who's looking for something adventurous, seem uninteresting. I will tell you that there was never a moment in this book, this very long book, 800 something pages, I think, something 800 pages. There was never a time that I thought, I can't wait for this book to be over, or I wish something would happen. I was, in fact, I had some kind of an unusual experience because I felt like at times I just forgot that I was even reading a book and I was just absorbed in the story. It doesn't happen very often, especially in a long book. Anyone who reads a lot knows that there comes a point somewhere in a book where you sort of think like, how much more is left? Like, how much, is this going to move on, or like, what's going on? Where am I at in the book? Honestly, I never had to remind myself to read this book. I frequently had to remind myself to stop reading this book. It just kept my attention the entire time. I have already said on here that Larry McMurtry is one of my absolute favorite writers. And so it's no surprising that maybe one of his most celebrated books is a book that just completely captured me. But I really feel like it's a novel for anyone. I don't think you have to like Westerns to like this book. In fact, you can not like Westerns at all and still like this book. You can like Westerns and like this book. You can like pulpy adventure stories and like this book. And you can like very detailed character studies and like this book. It doesn't sort of dress its language up. It's very plain spoken. It's very conversational in a sense in the way that it's written. Usually the narration seems to take a tone similar to the character that it's following. It's all told through third person. I guess, although I don't think about it a whole lot, that there's definitely a sort of, maybe it's a more recent thing that I see, or people like first-person books because it seems like those do a better job of delving into the characters. I can sort of see what they're saying there. There's no shortage of like character depth that isn't explored. It doesn't that you explore every bit of that character completely. There's still sort of mysteries about those characters. We're still sort of uncertain as to what those characters will or won't do, but we absolutely get a really careful and interesting look at them, no matter what character we explore. And sometimes characters that we have no interest in being around, we still get a really, I guess, compassionate look at them, or at least a very fair-minded look. All that together just really makes you feel like you live in that character's experiences. Really, really well done. Such amazing character development. The book does have a very large cast. It does shift and follow different characters throughout the course of it. You sometimes fall away from the two main characters, Gus and Call. I'll talk about them in a minute. And follow some other characters for a while. I found those sections just as interesting, just as compelling. I wanted to be there just as much as when we followed Gus and Call. Certain things you're kind of hoping for a little bit more than others, so to speak, but I never felt that the novel dragged, although it isn't a fast-paced novel either. In fact, the pacing of the novel is kind of a strange thing because I never really felt like I knew where I was in the arc of the novel exactly. It didn't really. It almost felt like it didn't have much of an arc. I mean, it does. The arc is a character arc. It's less of like a plot arc per se than it is the character themselves and what the characters are going through. And the plot, this cattle drive to Montana or the Montana Territory, that doesn't feel like something that the characters are obligated to do. It feels like that the events of the novel are up to the characters themselves. It always feels that way. It really feels like this is inevitable. These characters are making these decisions. Not that Larry McMurtry is making these characters do these things, that these characters are doing these things and that he is recording them. That's what it feels like. And it just makes for a really great experience, but it does make for an experience that doesn't feel like you have a driving plot that's moving the action forward. It feels like the characters are deciding it. So sometimes, I guess you could say, it feels like it's taking its time. I never found that to be a problem, personally. As I mentioned, the novel follows the two main characters are Captain Call and Captain Gus. Captain Call, Woodrow Call, and Captain Augustus McCrae, just called Gus, and then Captain Call, or sometimes just Captain. It follows those two characters. They're retired Texas Rangers who are in Texas, and they operate a horse and cattle company that they sell horses and cattle. They sometimes go across the Mexican border and steal cattle from cattle thieves and horse thieves and take them back. And they're they've been doing this sort of thing in the town of Lonesome Dove for a long time. It's a very small town, kind of a backwater Texas town, close to the border. Also, there's a couple other retired or former Texas Rangers, or I guess they're Texas Rangers also, but now they're cattle hands and wranglers, so to speak, with Call and Gus, and that's Dietz and P.I. Dietz is like an African American cowboy wrangler, and P.I. is sort of a dim-witted kind of guy, a reliable hand, but not altogether sharp, not a particularly sharp person. There's also a 17-year-old boy, Newt, whose mother was a prostitute. She passed away some time ago, and Gus and Call sort of adopted him. It's not really stated, at least not at the beginning of the novel, who his father is, although there's definitely some suggestion as to who his father could be. And a former ranger friend of theirs, Jake Spoon, comes into town. He's on the run from the law because he accidentally shot a dentist in Arkansas. Now, he and his sort of like reacquainting himself with Gus and Call talks about how he had been to the Montana Territory and how it was gorgeous up there and how, man, somebody could really make some money if they had all these horses and cattle like you guys had up there. And that really sort of interests Captain Call, who's sort of become kind of bored a little bit with what's going on in the area that they're in Texas, in Lonesome Dove. There's not a lot going on. He's sort of become bored with it. Gus is reminded of an old flame of his, Clara, and Jake tells him that he saw Clara in Ogallala, Nebraska. And Gus remembers that he and Jake had sort of had this sort of battling for her attentions, and that she had sort of spurned them both and married this horse trader, and that's where she lives now. He had always intended to go up and visit her, but never has, and so he starts thinking about Clara. Call is thinking about the value of horses and cattle in the Montana Territory, and Gus is thinking about Clara and just sort of like at least visiting her again because it really feels like she's like kind of the one that got away. They're thinking about this, and they get news that this Mexican bandit that they've sort of been battling for quite a while has died, and this really kind of hits Call kind of hard because he feels like that was sort of his like. it sort of was like his purpose in being here was that he was sort of, still sort of maintaining order, and that he really wouldn't be needed as much now. And the sort of idea of going to unexplored territory or unsettled territory makes Call decide that he's going to drive cattle up north to the Montana Territory and establish a ranch up there. In the town of Lonesome Dove itself, there is a young woman named Lorena. Through a series of misfortunes, she has found herself in Lonesome Dove as a prostitute. She's kind of very emotionally unavailable and quiet, and just sort of, just sort of like enduring the town that she lives in her life, and seems sort of listless and unhappy. Until Jake Spoon comes into town, and he seems to present to her, or seems to represent to her, like getting out of this backwater and finally like rejoining, like finally taking charge of her life or doing something. And so she becomes very interested and very much infatuated, or maybe even in love with Jake Spoon. This is much to the disappointment of Dish Bogut, a young cowboy who is very much in love with Lorena, but is unable to express himself. He's too shy and too nervous. And so he really feels as though he's been sort of ousted, and he's really vying for her attentions, but he knows that he really isn't able to stand up to Jake Spoon. But Jake is a lot more dangerous opponent and sort of suitor for him to challenge than someone else that hit Dish's own age. In Arkansas, July Johnson is a sheriff. His brother was the dentist that Jake Spoon shot and accidentally killed. Now, July didn't have a lot of affection for his brother, but his sister-in-law insists that he goes and finds Jake Spoon and brings him to justice. July is newly married to Elmira, and July is very much in love with Elmira, very much has a lot of affection for her, really wants to please her, make her happy. The feeling does not seem to be mutual. She has a son who's of teenage age, and July sets out with him, takes him with her at Elmira's request, to go and find Jake Spoon. Roscoe Brown, July's deputy, takes over the job of sheriff in this town while July is gone. And that's only like a smattering of some of the characters you encounter, some of the major characters that you see. And of course, they're all intertwined, as you can tell. And when Call decides that they are going to go to Montana and move these cattle there, of course, Dish Bogut signs up as a cowboy. Jake Spoon decides that he's going to go with them, and he's going to bring Lorena with them. Of course, Captain Call does not want a woman on the cattle drive, so Jake and Lorena cannot travel directly with the rest of the cowboys. And then the novel follows these characters as they move from Texas to the Montana Territory. Captain Call is definitely a strong, silent type character. He takes a very dim view of drinking and of prostitutes, and he doesn't drink or have anything to do with women himself. Often at night, Captain Call, when the men will sit around the campfire and talk about women or drink, he leaves and goes off by himself and sort of like ranges the territory, just kind of rides out. Captain Call has a horse that is nicknamed the Hell Bitch, and it is a horse that essentially no one else can really ride. The horse is so caustic that no one else can really handle her, and even Captain Call himself struggles in a sense to sort of maintain order with this horse, this mare, and he likes that. He likes it because he feels like he cannot rest with this horse. He can't let his guard down. He has to really always be reminded of what's going on and how the horse is acting in order to control her. He's absolutely a man who lives to work, and his partner, Gus McCrae, is the exact opposite. Gus is lazy. He doesn't like working. He only will work very reluctantly. He loves to talk, unlike Captain Call, who is often silent, and loves to argue. In fact, people often have to sort of be careful what they say around Gus, because he'll either not let them get away with it, or like not let them forget what they said and really hound them, or just argue and sort of win by attrition. Right? I had this view in my head of Gus as being sort of like a very boisterous and sort of outspoken, sort of Mark Twain-like character, right? Very intelligent and often speaking with a lot of irony. Just really, really entertaining character. Really entertaining. His dialogue is always engaging and always something interesting is happening when he talks. Usually will make you chuckle. Often will make you laugh. Gus loves to drink and he loves women. And Gus is also the only person who seems to be able to stand up to Captain Call, who can win an argument with him or to disobey him or not follow his orders. And Call, they're sort of on equal territory. Captain Call realizes or understands that they're on equal footing in this way, even though they're very different. And of course, these two men are greatest of friends. The plot of this novel is loosely based on the actual historical cattle driving of Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving. When they drove cattle from Texas to, I think they did go to the Montana Territory. And I'll probably have a slight spoiler section near the end where I'll talk about how some of these details match up. But that would the talk about here would absolutely spoil a part of the book. And it's kind of might shock some people. This was an extremely pleasurable book to read. Like I said, I would have to remind myself to stop reading, not to continue, not to like restart reading or like, oh, I'll read for 15 more minutes. It was always like, how much longer can I read? Do I have more time to read right now? Always wanted to go back to the story. Just kept pulling me back in. Like I said, the book focuses a lot on character development. It's a lot of like following a character and you really coming to understand how this character thinks and acts. Things are happening to the character. It's not as though the character is sitting around and you're learning about them. The character's doing things, but you get these very unflattering and revealing bits of story about them that really clue you in onto maybe some of the unusual behaviors or sort of decisions that they might come to. And sometimes McMurtry can get such amazing results out of such simple language with these characters. I think at one point Lorena talks about how Lonesome Dove was flat, and that's how she feels, kind of flat. And just the way that it's phrased is so keys you in so well to how she feels and what she thinks and sort of her attitude about everything in her life at that point. And then of course she gets visited by Jake Spoon, who's this sort of very charming and handsome cowboy and who likes to gamble and seems to be sensitive and listens to her and offers her what she thinks is an opportunity to get out of Lonesome Dove. And you can sort of see that this is like this shining hope for her. So you can really root for her in that sense. You can even really, I don't know that you would really necessarily have compassion for some of the very undesirable characters that we get to follow here and there, but you definitely get a very close look at them and you get a very fair-minded look at them. And there are some really, really nasty characters in this book. The villains that McMurtry writes about, and especially a couple of villains in this book, are particularly ugly and nasty. You know, there's the kind of villains that when they're around the main characters, you really have concern for those characters. And I need to say something that you need to remember that with his writing, with McMurtry's writing, that no one's exactly safe, right? You need to remember that. It definitely feels like you're getting a history in a sense. You're not getting a plot, right? That the characters and that they decide what happens in the book, not that the plot decides, right? The plot is where they end up or what ends up happening, not a path that they have to walk down per se. So as a result, things happen in this book that you may not like, that you may feel upset about and frustrated about. And then definitely when certain things happen, it upsets you. You're kind of hurt by it. Like, I didn't want that for this character. I didn't want this. But I think that's part of what makes this book so great is that it feels like you're not being manipulated, but that is just sort of how the story went. It's just sort of how events played out. And that, even if we didn't like it as much, we weren't given something that we would like. We're giving something that was honest. Something I haven't mentioned yet that I really need to say is that this book is amazingly and unexpectedly hilarious. There are some parts of this book that made me laugh out loud. There was a whole chapter that made me laugh out loud. There's a whole chapter, I think it's chapter 8, where they talk about the sign that Gus makes for their company, the Livery Emporium. Let me read what the sign actually says. So the sign reads, "The Hat Creek Cattle Company and Livery Emporium. Captain Augustus McRae and Captain W.F. Call are the proprietors. P.E. Parker and Dietz Joshua are wranglers. For rent, horses and rigs. For sale, cattle and horses. Goats and donkeys, neither bought nor sold. We don't rent pigs." And then it says in Latin, and forgive me, uva, uvium, vinido, varia fit. Which I looked up what that sort of means. I guess I'm not going to spoil it here. You could easily look this up yourself. I thought it was a little humorous. It probably is better in the context of the novel to have read the novel and then look that up, not to look it up now and be like, okay, what does that mean? But it's kind of great too, because there's all this comedy around that sign and how the sign comes up and this discussion that Call and Gus have about the sign. The best part being that it's not altogether certain that Gus even knows what that Latin phrase means, that he just wrote it up there to impress people. It's kind of wonderful. Just a really hilarious book. I mean, I can't express so many times, and also a PI, for example, will sometimes have such a underwhelming response to a really dramatic event. He'll just be like, someone will die, and he'll be like, well, gosh, you'll be like, what? It's like, that should not be funny. Something serious just happened, but PI's reaction is so ridiculous, and it's genuine. He really is surprised, but he's a little dim, and he just says things, and you're kind of like, God damn it, don't make me laugh. This is serious. Just great. I just can't express enough how funny the novel is when you don't expect it to be. Just fantastic. Like that quote I read from McMurtry at the beginning of this, he doesn't really want to romanticize the West. He tries to de-romanticize it, but somehow it doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite de-romanticize it. In fact, it even adds back to it. In the same way that a lot of Arthurian stories, the knights sort of are meet their end or come to a fate that is sort of fitting because of their own character flaws, but that they meet it honorably. These characters in this book, in a similar way, come to a fate. Sometimes it's tragic, but that they meet those tragic ends in a noble way and on their own terms. I like that. And I think that's what keeps this book from becoming a tragedy, because these characters don't just fall into complete despair. Some of them definitely are depressed, for sure, but they sort of insist on meeting it at whatever way they want to. Sometimes that is in a sad way. Sometimes it's in a reduced capacity from what their actual potential is. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's enduring something that they shouldn't have to endure. Enduring something that doesn't even make sense. But that's part of where that sort of brilliant and wonderful character development that McMurtry gives us comes into play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about spoilers here, probably for just a minute or two, but they are some pretty major spoilers. These aren't minor spoilers at all. So if you intend to read Lonesome Dove, you will need to skip ahead. I'm going to put some chapter marks, so there should be something where you can skip ahead to the next thing. I'm going to guess it's going to end up being a minute or two, but there should be a chapter where you can just skip over this section if you don't want to be spoiled. I would not recommend being spoiled for this book. It's not the kind of book that normally has spoilery stuff, since it's really heavy in character development, but some pretty major things happen, and you really don't want me to take that away from you. So if you haven't read it and you plan to read it, and I think you should skip this section. I think I said that many of these characters are at the mercy of themselves, but that they're not ashamed of their own flaws. They're very accepting. They're sort of, hold fast to them. And even to the end, and that keeps, like I said, it keeps the sort of very tragic things that happen to them from being complete tragedy. There's some nobility in it. Jake Spoon, when he's eventually caught by the Hat Creek outfit, by Captain Call and Gus, and hanged, in the final moments spurs his own horse and ends up killing himself, sort of taking charge of his own mistakes in that sense. Dietz, when he knows that something bad is going to happen on the way to Montana, seems to have this sort of supernatural or preternatural idea that he's going to meet his end, still never shirks his duty, still persists and goes on. Gus, when he gets gangrene in one leg, and one leg is amputated, and the doctor says, "I need to amputate your other leg so that we can save your life," refuses to have his other leg amputated, and chooses to die rather than be legless, rather than be essentially kind of a joke or to sort of be a lesser person, a lesser man. He would rather die right then than even have one day as legless. It's sort of against his own character. Or even Woodrow Call, when he agrees to take Gus back to Texas to bury him, a thing that everyone seems to say is a ridiculous idea, but that he insists on doing. And in fact, that is historically accurate to Loving and Goodnight. Goodnight did take Loving when he had gangrene in his arm, and he refused to have his arm amputated before he could talk to his partner. But by the time Goodnight showed up, it was too late, and the gangrene had spread too far. And that Loving sort of expressed sadness that he wasn't going to be buried at home, and Goodnight transported his body back to Texas. Almost out of character for Captain Call, when Dietz passes away, he makes a sign that expresses just how valuable and how important Dietz was to him. Captain Call, who's someone who always has a difficult time with words. Let me read you a comparison between the actual sign for the historical man that Dietz is based on and Dietz's own sign. The historical figure that Dietz is based on is Bose Eichert, a actual African-American cowboy who traveled with Goodnight. And when he passed away, though he did not pass away in the trail, Goodnight wrote, "Served with me 4 years on the Goodnight Loving Trail, never shirked duty or disobeyed an order, rode with me in many stampedes, participated in 3 engagements with Comanches, splendid behavior. See Goodnight." And Captain Call for Dietz wrote this sign: "Served with me 30 years, fought in 21 engagements with the Comanche and Kiowa, cheerful in all weathers, never shirked a task, splendid behavior." Something that is a sign that's very out of character for Captain Call. A lot of talking. And again, Captain Call is an interesting character. You get a lot out of Gus. You get a lot. It's interesting in a sense that you get so much character development from those two characters throughout the course of the novel. You get so much, but it really only feels like at the very end of the novel you're starting to figure those characters out, that they're that complicated and that complex. And it really does feel like at the very end of the novel you're starting to maybe understand Captain Call, who seems the hardest nut to crack. A fantastic novel. Can't recommend it enough. If you enjoy Westerns, you're going to like this book. If you would like adventure fiction, like I guess you could say from Louis L'Amour or maybe Jack London, I think you're going to like this book. Of course, you have to remember that action is a lot more spread out, but when the action happens, I will tell you that it has a great intensity, right? When there's action in Lonesome Dove, you definitely feel like people are at risk. It isn't just a thing to get your interest and to keep you moving, get the blood flowing. Like, there's really things at risk when there's action in these stories. And I really like that about this. It feels genuine. If you just like fiction, you just like character development fiction, you're going to like this. You don't need to like Westerns to like this book. If you like Westerns, you'll probably like this book. I mean, I can't recommend it enough. It's interesting in a sense that this book, in McMurtry's own quote, that he's comparing it to Gone with the Wind. This book sort of being the end cap to my 2024 year, or one of the very last books I'm going to read, comparing that to Musashi that I read at the very beginning of the year, which is also described as being a sort of Gone with the Wind story. Both long epics. Musashi is a much more inspiring feeling novel. A really great adventure novel. It feels like a really wonderful novel. Lonesome Dove is a little quieter in that sense, but such an engaging story. Such a story that is very easy if you start the novel, I think, to be convinced that you should keep reading. I think it's really timeless in that sense. Even if you don't normally read this kind of fiction, even if you normally read science fiction or fantasy, I think you're going to find something you love in here. This reminds me to just also mention very quickly that I did find in a couple sections, I can't remember where in here, but I did find a couple sections in here that reminded me very much of Dorothy Scarborough's The Wind, the discussion about the wind and how it sort of messes with people, and it's like a character in and of itself, or it sort of has a quality in and of itself that can drive people crazy. There's talked about a little bit in here when we're in Ogallala with Clara. Definitely, which I really enjoyed and recognized. So I'm really happy that I read The Wind this year so I could see that its influence in this book. And also interesting that this is written in '85, right? This is kind of past the heyday of the cowboy novel, so to speak, right? That would have been in the 40s and the 50s, maybe into the 60s and 70s. The 80s is kind of coming in late, right? I definitely would say that like cowboy novels and westerns were, I don't want to say they're out of favor, but definitely the heyday has passed. So I think it's really interesting that we get such a classic western that late, and one that really seems to elevate the genre, something that takes it above just a pulp story, right, and really elevates the entire experience, but still remains true to that western quality. So somebody who likes a western is still going to like this book. I haven't seen the movie. I definitely intend to watch it, but I wanted to get this review out first. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books. If you enjoyed this review or this video, I appreciate a like and a subscribe if you want to see more of this. So even if you don't, well, hopefully you want to see. If you want to see more of something, you can see more of it if you subscribe. It's easier, and I appreciate it. Meant to make a 500 subscriber video. We're closer to 700 now, so I think I'll just make a 700 subscriber video. That seems right. It's a good number, right? I like that number. Anyhow, been a wonderful year. I should have another video up before the end of the year, I hope. But just been a fantastic year. It was really great, big novel to read at the end of the year, although it did take me some time. It was a really great experience, and just this year has been awesome. This has been a great year. Getting to hang out with all these guys like Chris and Daniel and Richard, and interacting with friends like Marissa and Curtis. It's just been freaking great. So, there'll be another video, but just been awesome. And this was a great book to end the year with, or to be one of the last books of the year. So that's it. That's all I got to say. Thanks very much.